If you're on Facebook, now you can follow Notebook on Cities and Culture on its official Facebook page. Take a look at facebook.com/Notebook on Cities and Culture. Season 3 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley and Daniel Murphy. There are two claims I hear made about literary Los Angeles. They seem contradictory. Number one, Los Angeles is not a particularly readerly place. Number two, Los Angeles is the biggest book market in America. Usually it's the same observer saying these two things, like, look at this contradiction. You seem well placed to know. Are either of those true? Is one untrue? What's the story with those memes about reading Los Angeles?
Well, I think that the reference to Southern California being the largest book buying town has something to do with it being the second in per capita book sales. And at least it used to be that Iowa City was per capita the largest book buying community. And
more library patrons than residents in Iowa City, as I understand it, right? That's a city with some wonky book statistics for reasons that are obvious.
It's not librarians. It's mostly, I believe, their Iowa Writers MFA program, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the best MFA programs.
And indeed, people seem to remain patrons of the library after they leave, if it outstrips their population count, the number of registered patrons of the library. But we weren't talking about Iowa City; we were talking about Los Angeles.
Well, I was born in Iowa City, for one thing. So, no, Los Angeles is very readerly. It gets a bad reputation for its superficiality, definitely with the entertainment industry. But there is a lot going on here, and I think there always has been. What I like to think about when I think of people criticizing L.A. for having a lot of superficial components is that what comes with that is also a subversive element, and that's one of the aspects that I really love. That's really, I think, where we get a lot of the classic L.A. noir elements. Most other cities that I can think of will tell you straight up what they are, who they are. The people will say, this is what we're going to do. Los Angeles is the only place I can think of where you could be having a drink at 8 or 9 p.m. and at 4 o'clock in the morning end up in Pasadena watching naked pregnant women jump through fire rings.
To name one example.
So, it's just a really interesting polarization.
It is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you from downtown Los Angeles, sitting above Spring Street, here with Tyson Cornell, who is the founder of Rare Bird Lit, a literary publicity marketing firm and events firm, by the way. And he's the founder of Rare Bird Books, a publisher. Both of these Rare Bird firms are New York and Los Angeles based. He also, if you are a buyer of books in Los Angeles, if you've been a long-time buyer, you may know him from his time as the publicity and marketing director of Book Soup, the famous bookstore on the Sunset Strip. And Tyson, what gave you your introduction to the subversiveness of Los Angeles?
Well, I originally came to Los Angeles to go to UCLA and study ethnography. At the same time, I was writing my graduate dissertation on the American Newsstand and obsessively doing field work, working and hanging out and observing 24-hour street corner LA newsstands.
Now, newsstands are actually still a thing in Los Angeles for listeners who haven't been here in a while or who've never been here. There's Book Soup, of course, where you worked, they have the most robust-looking newsstand of them all, do they not?
No, they don't.
They don't. Or did they once? Has it shrunk since I've been able to get to the Strip?
I don't blame you for saying that. It is no. I mean, Book Soup is known for their newsstand. I actually think it's it's disappearing.
Wow. I said robust looking, by the way.
Oh, robust looking?
Yeah.
Oh, that may be true. But it does look pretty nice, especially with the neon. World Book and News on Hollywood and Cahuenga is the classic, though I was there a couple days ago and it has depleted since then. Pico Robertson stand is fabulous.
The long one on Fairfax.
Centerfolds.
Centerfolds, okay.
Is that what you're talking about?
There's more than one, isn't there? Fairfax Boulevard has a couple newsstands. Does it not?
There is one at Caddy Corner from Cantor's that is getting better. They've kind of gone into a lot of sideline merchandising, a lot of drinks and whatnot, and there is some neon going on there. But Centerfolds is actually like a little house or a little structure.
You could still do a tour of Los Angeles through its newsstands, could you not? I mean, is the one in Wilshire and La Brea, does that ever open, or is that just a shuttered shell?
You mean the one that's next to the parking lot?
Yeah, it's across from a Starbucks. I see it, and it's not going anywhere, but it's also, I don't think, ever been open when I've walked by.
But people are playing chess outside.
Oh, I mean, there's activity, there's drinking.
Yeah, there are a couple different kinds of newsstands in Los Angeles. That's one of them that I think is kind of in between the other two. The other ones we were talking about, traditional all-night newsstands, mostly on the west side. And then, like downtown, you'll have these small little storage canisters that open up, and they sell periodicals out of there.
Identical, by the way, to the ones I see in Mexico City. It's like it's like a tree you see in both cities that just grows.
There you go. Yeah, I've always wondered, maybe I should start asking some people about this, because I feel like the ones downtown here are subsidized by the city somehow.
Really?
Yeah, or I don't know. It's very curious to me.
Well, tell me about the state of the American newsstand when you were doing this academic work.
Sure. I really feel gifted to have seen what I think is the last wave of the traditional newsstands, because when I stopped doing research and working in that world, that's when harsh declines in periodical sales have gone in. I remember the first year.
What year was it?
I'd have to look up exactly, but this is maybe, I don't know, 2002, 2003, 2004, something like that. Yeah, I mean, I remember I was still doing stuff when 9/11 hit. I remember that was still a serious periodical movement, but I don't remember Katrina, those kinds of big newsworthy things where Time is putting out 8 different commemorative editions, and there are 5 newsstand employees on the street as people pull up. You just weren't. I just don't think that was happening then. So it was probably that 2002, 2003 a time. But before that, I read a book a number of years ago on 42nd Street and the peep shows, and there was a lot of similarity between the way those were run. Those were more mob run.
Oh, I see.
But newsstands are, at least when I was there, it was still mom and pop driven. There were a couple companies that were running stands across the country and whatnot, but really it was like, newsstand owners it wasn't uncommon to hear stories about them hiring thieves to steal other newsstand owners' stock, and then, stamp. One owner would stamp their name on the inside, then go into the other stand and find their copy and threaten them, and it was still kind of Wild West mentality.
When you were doing historical research on the newsstand in Los Angeles in the mid 20th century, early 20th century, or in New York for that matter, would you get that sense like, oh man, there was a time? That was the day when things were exciting, or was it like? Did you get the twinge as well? Like, well, that seems like an inconvenient criminal time to be around. It's
very interesting. I mean, the newsstand world and the radio world, those were the gateways of information. And I don't know, maybe it's that way now, but definitely not so much as people would. The first section that I wrote about in my dissertation was called "The Customer and the Straggler," and you have people that are showing up every day or every week for the periodicals or the cigarettes or whatever they're actually needing to pick up. But then there were the people that would go there and not really buy anything, but they wanted to be in the loop and hip to what was happening.
A type of customer, not, I'm doing the air quotes, not unknown in the bookstore world, right?
Yeah, exactly. Not known. And that actually is very, I noticed in my research that I did in a number of cities throughout the world, was unique to Los Angeles. In Japan, people didn't hang around or even talk to the newsstand workers. People in New York, people just get what they need and they leave.
Right. Is there a sense that Los Angeles doesn't rid itself of its anachronisms as quickly as other major cities do? Like, things tend to stick around here in strange, seemingly functionless ways for a long time. Do you think that's true? I've been here less time than you have.
I think it's true in some ways, but then I guess my hesitation is that there are a lot of things that are disappearing.
What right now is going away fast in Los Angeles?
Well, the thing that's on my mind a lot, I love that downtown is growing and is evolving into an area that is compatible with the people working and living down here. But at the same time, you have some great buildings, and you have great areas that are being bought up and just being wiped out. Beautiful facades are being torn down and replaced with really tacky elements. There's one particular person that's pretty heavy down here that I'm critical of. But, at the same time, I'm not married to change. Same goes for the bookstore stuff and the newsstand days. Do I wish that, I could still go to those areas and see those things? Yeah. But, I guess it's just something that we have to deal with.
Now, I've read that through working at Newsstands as research, that was how you made your way to Book Soup, where you were for 9.5 years. Is that true?
Yeah, I was in college, working at two different newsstands, and being a straggler at a few others. And I stumbled across the Book Soup newsstand. I still know the employee, Mario, who left and was a regular there for many years. And I remember going up to him as he was ringing a customer up, and I was smoking back when smoking wasn't as ostracized as it is now. And I remember standing behind the customer turning around and me accidentally blowing smoke in his face. And then Mario wasn't so happy with me, but I asked him, I said, how does one get into this kind of work? It seems really amazing and unique. And he said, what do you mean, get a job here? That's not really that difficult. So that was my beginning at Book Soup. From there, I started helping out with events, and it was like the mailroom kid who worked his way up into running the bookstore in many ways up until when the owner, Glenn Goldman, died.
Does working at newsstands, or did working at newsstands, give you your finger on the pulse? Put your finger on the pulse of the neighborhood? Could you really feel some sort of omniscience or close to it of what was going on around, whether it was on the Strip or elsewhere, or is that too much of a claim to make for the trade of the newsstand attendant?
Well, I think that you can make that claim if you have a newsstand attendant. That's a great way to describe them.
What's the actual word?
Oh, a newsstand employee.
Okay.
Attendant's good. I like that, though. It means that it gives the idea that they're providing a service to some greater good.
I see.
If they're perceptive and they're looking for those things, absolutely. And they're out there. They're probably one of the only people that are doing that. Definitely on the Strip. I mean, I have seen waiters, waitresses have that kind of outlook on things. One of the books that I did base a lot of my research on is called The Cocktail Waitress, and it did look at things the same way I was doing. And also, I've never seen this perspective, but a valet attendant would provide very unique perspective.
That's true, and they're sort of they're omnipresent but kind of unseen in Los Angeles. There's so many valet attendants here.
There are so many of them, and I know that it really just takes that one person to look at the job as being something that's more than the job and realize it for its social and cultural components that, that's just what I wanted to do. I mean, I started with the newsstand world because I had a sociology professor who wrote a PhD dissertation on high-pressure auto sales.
Oh, my.
And I read this 4-volume, 2,000-page reference book in the library about him working for 2 years at this Van Nuys newsstand, or it could have been a couple, and just these insane stories about the behind the scenes world of managers pumping up their salesmen to go out and blow people off the lot, and it was very sexist and misogynistic. They were doing cocaine and drinking an insane amount of alcohol, and it was just this like Wall Street style tally board that they were, and I was blown away. And I said,
Glengarry Glen Ross kind of setup.
Very much so. And I said, that's the kind of research that I want to do. And he said, well, on your drive home, look around and find an environment that you think you could get into. And I don't know, it wasn't that profound. I went out and saw all these newsstands in Los Angeles.
How soon after you came to the greater Los Angeles area did you start doing this?
Within a month.
Within a month. So this was, in some sense, the way you learned how the city worked. Could I claim that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I came here in the month of June 6th, and I started summer classes that July, I think.
I see.
That was just right. I just went right into it.
You began everything right then, but tell me about the process, over either in the immediate or over the years of just learning how to exist in Los Angeles through these things you were doing.
Oh, that's interesting. The first place that I lived in Los Angeles was this bungalow at the corner of Sunset and Laurel Avenue, 1510 North Laurel, and it was my landlord was the owner of the Laugh Factory, Jamie Masada, and in hindsight, I was really lucky to have just come into that because almost all of the performers at the Laugh Factory would park right in front of my bungalow every night, and I had just a fantastic interaction with an insider world, and I didn't really know it at the time, know how impacting this was. You
didn't realize what perspective you were getting, that it was a privileged perspective somehow.
Absolutely not. No, it was just I came for other reasons. Then definitely I was more into music and books than I was into comedy. So this is just something I stumbled into. But that was really, the acclimating element.
Well, what did that teach you? Looking back, what did you learn quick that others don't so quickly because you were in that environment?
Oh, the etiquette and mannerisms?
Really?
Absolutely.
I don't think I even know those. What were some points of etiquette and mannerisms of Los Angeles, or that subculture that you drew from that?
Well, I don't think there's a formal way to describe that, but I think it's, I definitely consider myself more of an introverted person that's, in more of a social type of world, and definitely back with dealing with newsstands or books or book soup or events, it's very extroverted and social and out there. What I learned right off the bat was how to interact with people in a way that how do I say this without sounding crass, that manipulated its environment in a way to deal with certain people and make them feel comfortable around you, to make them, I saw this at the comedy club where it's, you have one person treating one person one way and that same person treating somebody else another way, and it wasn't dishonest or not done in a genuine way. It was just dealing with multiple personalities. I saw Jamie Masada, who I haven't seen in years, is just work with these debut comedy personalities, famous actors. It was really kind of all across the board to opening up. I still think he still does this, opens up his doors with complimentary Thanksgiving and Christmas meals for the homeless and any struggling actors and anybody. So he dealt with just this broad range of people. I think that was the genesis of how I observed doing that, because I use those same techniques in what I do now, what I did at Book Soup, and those are the same techniques that people come back to me and say, that's really unique to what you do.
What came first in your life, the reading or the punk rock?
Oh, reading. I've been a book person the longest. I remember my father giving me license with books and by saying, if you'll read it, I'll buy it for you.
You used that to full advantage, I would take it?
Absolutely, yeah, I did. And that was kind of the beginning where I took entire collections of authors or periods or genres and just went to town. And I got to the point where I was in my teens inhaling so many books that I wasn't really remembering what I was reading.
Oh, I see.
But I was reading them.
Mm-hmm. You were having read them.
I was going through the motions of reading them.
But with that sort of starting with that intellectual pursuit of reading, how did the visceral pursuit of punk rock enter into your life?
Well, I mean, in my early teens, I started playing in bands growing up, and some of those bands went on to take little regional van tour trips, and which expanded into the entire West Coast, and then went into and for many years I just ended up, if I wasn't playing in the band that was on tour, I would just offer to sell merchandise or help out with gear, because I didn't want to go back home. I went to high school originally for 3 weeks and then left and did my thing, and then went back. I went back to school when I was about 17, and then applied to go to UCLA.
You're also co-editing a book that we have to mention. I'll mention it a few times. A book of essays on prog rock called Yes is the Answer that comes out May 14th. It seems like, I think to somebody who doesn't listen to punk or prog, they would see those as two camps that can never meet and maybe slightly at war. How can you clear up that conception? Well,
and it's definitely addressed in the book by a number of people, but they seem like opposing forces. I would consider myself more of a progressive rock fan than anything else, but those were the two dichotomous forces in my life growing up. People definitely give the 1976, 1977 punk rock movement as the nail in the coffin to progressive rock. But there are so many more interconnecting backstories to that. The people that were part of that late 70s punk rock movement, many of them weren't fans, but they were fans of the progressive rock stuff that was going on, and if they weren't fans of it, they were influenced by it, and vice versa. There's a great story that, and I'm not really a Phil Collins fan, no offense, Phil, but of Phil Collins saying that he was being criticized by the Dead Boys, and he ran into Rat Scabies from the Dead Boys in an airport, and he ran up to him and whispered in his ear, "Hey man, I just want to say I'm a huge Genesis fan." And then also, Johnny Rotten's known for wearing his "I Hate Pink Floyd" shirt, but then 5 or 6 years later, becoming great friends with, I think, Roger Waters and collaborating on some stuff. So I don't think the divide is too black and white.
The divide between the musicians certainly isn't such a divide, but I remember in high school, I was in high school in the late 90s and early 2000s, and even then I got this sense of, progressive rock felt like it was long gone, and as in some sense did punk, but there was this, I would think about progressive rock, and I would think the qualities of this music seem to be that it's virtuosic, that the players are very skilled, that they put a lot of time and craft into this. And I always wondered, why is that thought of as so uncool? Like, why is it not cool to be good at making music? That's maybe putting it too simplifiedly, perhaps. And I didn't even listen to much progressive rock myself, but why was, or is it not cool to be virtuosic, to play breathtaking solos, or to layer things in a very crafted way that is, on at least a technical level, always impressive?
Well, I think this stuff, I think it's just like anything or any genre. There are elements that come in and ruin it for the imitators come in and ruin it for the genuine.
It's a bad apple thing.
Maybe. It's just my theory, or something that I think about on the topic, but I think that the great progressive rock that I love, that when I say I'm a big progressive rock fan, that's what I'm referring to, has energy and has power and has, it may have virtuosity, but it doesn't come from a place of, let me show you how fast I can play.
It's not only about that.
No, those are, but you're also talking about a time when progressive rock came up, is that music was being redefined. People weren't doing those kinds of techniques on those instruments. So in a way, it was kind of like, we got this new synthesizer. Look what we can do with it. And 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years later, everybody's doing it, and it's not so unique anymore. And then it just kind of becomes lame.
It becomes the lamification sets in.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you look at some of the early progressive rock bands, to me they're just as punk rock as anything that came 10 years later. Seeing Matching Mole perform in Europe, that is insane. Or seeing Peter Gabriel perform on his first and second solo record tours. That's pretty punk rock. Seeing Yes in their early days. There's not much difference, I think, from that and from other punk rock bands.
Given this project, this book of essays you're editing on progressive rock, and given your career with one foot in music and one foot in books, I take it that you don't credit that variously attributed quote about reading or writing about music being like dancing about architecture. It makes more sense than that to write or to read about music, right?
Absolutely. My co-editor and I for this, Mark Weingarten, and I did this together. We have ideas for other books. And progressive rock was interesting because people have written about it, but there wasn't really a whole lot out there, and it was either you're on its side or you're against it. And we wanted to provide a book that did have traditional music criticism, which it has, mixed with personal stories that are intertwined. I'm surrounded by people that hate progressive rock, and I wanted a book that they could read and enjoy and appreciate, even though they didn't like the genre. And so it's not really just about analyzing every time signature that goes in. There's some of that in there, but it's more about how these musical movements affected the lifestyle of people in general.
Now, how over the course of your career have you balanced playing music, working with books, and then overlapping the concepts of music and books where possible? Is this sort of, has the Has the shape of that surprised you, the balance of that surprised you as much as anybody, or was there a plan like, okay, I'm going to do this with music and I'm going to do this with books, and this is how I'm going to arrange my life to make them both possible?
Well, I mean, from the beginning, I was interested in both. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in lots of things. I don't really see much of a divide between any of them. It's just creative output. Mm-hmm. It's hard to have that Renaissance type of mentality, but then also be accomplishing at the same time. And I think that's probably the most difficult aspect of it. I'll tell people regularly that my biggest struggle is just with being human, that you have to sleep and you have to eat and then you have to do all these things. But I think if you can come up with the ideas and you can execute them, you know, it doesn't matter if it's music or books or whatever it is. I mean, I have done and accomplished things in all areas because the opportunities had presented themselves.
What makes Japan a good place to go rock, as you have done?
Japan is an amazing place to go play music. I started playing music in Japan because when I came to Los Angeles to do all the things that I mentioned earlier, I was also looking for people to play music with. I placed or responded to a recycler ad. Do you know what the recycler is?
Is it still around? I know what it was. Does it exist in some form?
It might be online still, but back then I feel old now. Back then it was still in print, right. And you know, you could place an ad in there, a classified ad, looking for musicians. And I either placed it or I responded to one, and got in contact with this guy Eric, who we talked a bit on the phone. And I remember I was working at the Laurel Canyon Ventura stand, having a conversation with him about getting together. And he said, I said, well, what all have you done? And he's like, oh, I've been in lots of bands over the years, and you know, I've had 3 number one hard rock singles, and have experience doing 9 high budget music videos for MTV, stuff like that. And I was like, would I know any of this stuff? And he said, I don't know. Have you heard of a band called Faster Pussycat? And I said, I just thought it was really, really strange that I was starting to enter this world of hair metal when those bands were, I guess in a lot of ways, the late 90s, when they were cutting their hair and becoming more punk rock. And, you know, I wanted to put together a band that had more of a Turbo Negro, Backyard Babies type Scandinavian aggressive pop, punk rock sound to it. And then we ended up getting together and then bringing on guitar player from the band Rock's Gang and LA Guns, and the drummer for Enough's Enough, Vic Fox. And it was like this situation where I was surrounded by people 12, 15 years older than I am that were in notable hair metal bands. And we liked what we were doing, and Eric reached out to promoters in Japan. And we set up a Japanese tour for 5 nights at the Wall in Shinjuku, maybe 6 months later. And that was just kind of the beginning. And I met a lot of people over there, and ended up putting a number of records out over there and going back. And it's a really magical place.
What about Japan sustains that to the point where you say, I don't need to put out a record in not Japan. I don't need to play in non-Japan. I can. This is where my band is. Like, what about it makes it so possible there?
Well, I mean, it's always been a running joke that you know, you're big in Japan. I've never heard of them. Well, and yeah, it's for a reason. I mean, in some ways, the Japanese are cutting edge and they're ahead of the curve, but in most ways, they're behind the times. I hate to say it because I love the no offense, Japanese.
I've recorded many conversations that come to the same conclusion, so I guess I shouldn't pretend like I'm surprised.
I'm only speaking about music right now.
Right.
Japanese I love and are very forward-thinking.
With the combination of advancedness, like super advancedness, and the exact opposite of that seems to characterize Japan in all ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Just look at the toilets.
Yeah, that's a great example. Which ones? There's the archaic, where it's just a concrete hole or tiled hole in the ground, and then there's this super deluxe, heated, and there's music playing out of the toilet seat and stuff like that. It's just bizarre.
So if Japan gets into a genre of music, you can say either, well, that's passé here, so Japan loves it, or are they ahead? Is it coming back and they're getting it back first? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. That's interesting. Well, then when does nostalgia start, and when does the
Right.
But when back to your original question, which was interesting, when can a band say we don't need the rest of the world? I mean, I don't know. I think I could have accomplished more musically if that's all I wanted to do.
Right.
And I don't think it would be too possible to sustain a full career and only be in Japan. Or I mean, I might be critical that most bands can't do that in any country. That comes a time when they need to let the world in, whether they accept them or not. I mean, we're doing a Sparks book right now, where they're Los Angeles based, but they're, correct me if I'm wrong,
in England, right?
Yeah, I think mostly they're big in the UK, but people think that they're from London because they're much more popular over there. There are a lot of bands like that.
And yet I think of Sparks, I think of the band Sparks, the Male Brothers, as a very Los Angeles enterprise. I mean, they were born here and they grew up here. They may be bigger in England. I think Japan may like them as well. I don't know, but there's something very Los Angeles about them in that specifically. So many people that I've talked to, and I bring up Sparks, and they know Sparks, if they know Sparks. That's important. They have the story like, yeah, I just heard a song of theirs, and then I looked up, I was like, what's this band? I looked them up, and they've been going since 1970, and I have, maybe earlier, and they have 30 albums or something. And people always have this discovery story like, I thought this band was made up, like that there was a piece of performance art that these dudes just said, these middle-aged guys said, let's pretend like we've been a band for 40 years and put out all this music. I mean, but they have been around, yet there's that discovery, which is like the discovery you have of things in Los Angeles. Does that make any sense at all?
A timelessness to it, but also
there's a timelessness, but also like it's existed the whole time, like a part of Los Angeles or some element of Los Angeles. You could have found it easily, but you just didn't until now. And that seems like it happens here more than anywhere else, in America anyway.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, the Male Brothers are definitely interesting. And it's also interesting how they're insiders and outsiders in many ways.
There's something, I've never met the fellows, I assume you have. There's something that has always been unreal about them to me. I don't quite know what it is, but if I learned one day that they had always been actors portraying two brothers, I'd be very surprised but not shocked. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm definitely I'll never say anything definite about them because it wouldn't surprise me at all if they just had this big running joke on the world. And I mean that in the best possible way. Right.
I mean, that's exactly a reason to like them, certainly. Now, you mentioned this Sparks book. I don't know how much you can say about it, but for fans of Sparks listening, and there'll be a few, what should they be looking forward to?
Well, the book is called Sparkstastic, 21 Nights with Sparks in London. The book does pertain to this conversation in the respect of Book Soup because it's authored by Tosh Berman, who was is a longtime Book Soup employee, but not so anymore, and was the buyer there for many years, as well as the son of the late collage artist Wallace Berman. And it's Tosh's story. It's a fan's notes type of book where he traveled to London to see Sparks and their Sparks Spectacular event where they did all 20 of their previous albums, night after night.
Well, speaking of unreal seeming achievements.
Yeah, exactly. And the 21st night was their latest album. And they did this all as a, I don't want to say stunt, but it was a marketing driven idea to raise awareness for the most recent album, and pretty insane. I don't think there are many bands that can do that. I think it was 253 or 256 songs that they played, and so this is Tosh's album by album, night after night. Personal memoir of the experience.
Now, you mentioned Tosh Berman, who worked at Book Soup a long time, and he's a name familiar to me because I contacted him when I first got to Los Angeles. It was like, how am I gonna get money? Maybe I'll work at a bookstore. That's a common impulse. The year I came to Los Angeles, that window had probably closed, but I was like, I'll work at a bookstore. So I did talk to Tosh for a while about applying to Book Soup. Never got an interview there. I applied to another, I won't name the name, but a well-known bookstore in the northeast of greater Los Angeles, and it was, they brought me into a group interview that was one of the, I don't know if harrowing is the word, but it was just a freakish experience where it was these dozen people all sort of supplicating for a bookstore job, and then 8 managers all sitting there across the room, staring at them, and everybody there in the room, all the candidates, shall we say, the applicants, were just falling all over themselves to say how much they want to work at this bookstore, how much they want to work at bookstores generally, how important customer service is to them, how just going into flop sweats, saying how much they love simply serving customers and making customer service happen. And I was just sitting there thinking, someone here is lying. Some big charade is going on in this room. And I couldn't take it, and I just sort of I did all but put my middle finger up in this interview, ultimately, just because I couldn't stand the tension of this and then this fakery going on. Which is all to get to the question of what happened to working in bookstores? It used to be cool. Did something happen? What
you're saying reminds me of something that I think is true at a lot of independent bookstores, but we used to say it a lot at Book Soup, mostly from the owner, Glenn. He would say when there was a difficult customer, what's different about chain stores and independents is that here the customer is not always right. and thinking of that scenario of people clamoring for a job and talking about customer service, they may have had a better chance at getting the job if they would have the opposite approach.
My approach didn't work for me, I'll tell you that.
What was your approach?
It was the opposite of that.
Was it?
Yes.
Well, maybe that's not a good idea. But I don't know. The independent bookstore world is so interesting. I mean, you kind of have to. There's a great Bill Bruford, the drummer for Yes and King Crimson, who also played with Genesis, related to their Yes book, where he says the difference between playing in Yes and playing in King Crimson is that in Yes we used to argue about specific things for hours, and in King Crimson the same argument existed, but you were always expected to already know the answer. And I think that same idea exists in bookstores, where you have to balance between being unique and based off of individuality, but also be professional and organized like an actual retail business.
Bookstores seem to benefit less and less as time goes on from that idea, that sort of meme that, like, here's a place where we'll hire freaks.
Yeah, and that's for the most. I mean, if you have to be a high functioning freak.
HFF.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're a heroin addict who reads a lot of books and gets a lot done, has multiple jobs, you could be a good candidate for a bookstore. I mean, I've just worked with so many insane people over the years, and it is surprising that looking at that, you look at the critiques of being a book nerd, or it's anything. It's really anything but that. I mean, the times that I've spent playing music and hanging around with musicians and subversive cultures, being around authors and books, it's they're more insane than any hair metal musician.
They are the depth of the depth.
Yeah, not all of them, but the real crazy ones. They just go far beyond anything that could be told in. I didn't tour with Motley Crue, but reading those kinds of tour books, it's like authors will far exceed just go hang out with somebody like non-Thompson.
Yes, well, to name one prominent example, certainly somewhere on the right end of the spectrum rather than the left, I would think, as far as extremity goes.
Absolutely.
But he's a good example, and a writer who has endured, unlike some wild man types from, I don't know, is that true? Do you see a pattern in the wild man writers and who lasts and who doesn't? Because people are always going to read Thompson or Bukowski or people like that, or Jim Carroll. But so, is there some mass of this substrate of the wild men that just were a flash in the pan?
I like those writers that you mentioned, but personally, I have little interest, long-term interest in that kind of lifestyle. I think after the initial wave of it gets a little old. And but at the same time, you can really tell an amazing writer or an amazing performer, musician, somebody that can do something that is so cliche or has been done before, that doesn't, when you break it down fundamentally, isn't really that unique in perspective, but somehow they're able to pull it off and make it entertaining and brilliant, then that's something special. I think, people like Thompson, Bukowski, Carroll. Was Carroll that crazy? Was he just a drug addict? But,
well, it's, maybe. There's the one, they kind of go hand in hand sometimes, although maybe he was subdued, not nuts, I don't know, in his younger days, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. But I think that, maybe it goes back to what we were talking about, prog music, where the imitators that come after that are the ones that give it a bad reputation. If it were actually Bukowski and Thompson and those, kind of reckless and wild living type of literary characters, and there are many before and after that too. I don't want to be naive to that. I think that it can get a little old after a while.
The inevitable wave of mediocrity that just washes up whatever art form or whatever movement is fresh and new. I guess this is something that has no exception in human history. There's always the imitators, and they're always more driven by imitation. Now, it's sort of like me trying to sell myself as a bookstore employee. On some level, I knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't suited for the job. Because my input, like I said, I was like, "Oh, work at a bookstore." You shrug. Great. Well, thank you. The bookstore employees I've met have all been cool and smart, so that's a compliment. But the way that I thought to myself was like, "Hey, a bookstore, that's a place I could work when I can't do anything else." You know what I mean? So I gave up on that. But I do like to go to bookstores. I like to buy books. Like anybody listening to the show, like you or other guests I've had, I like to read books. The book is a product that seems to need no improvement, and the bookstore experience I enjoy every time. But, I go on Twitter every day and I hear talk about bookstores are about to burn out. Publishers are about to all go under. It's the end of days for books. Hey, here's a new wildly unappealing alternative to the book someone came up with because they can make money from it, but it doesn't solve any problem you have. Like, it's the mismatch between the satisfaction of the book reading and buying and shopping experience and the alleged almost immediate dissolution of all of it. What's going on there? Books
and music, and they're not going to die as forms of creative expression. What's going to change is everything in between the reader or the listener and the musician and the author. You know, I don't know an author that's just going to give up on writing because it becomes less commercially viable. And, you know, I mean, there are a lot of words in books, and they're hard, and it sounds funny, but they're hard to produce. So it doesn't just take a crazy idea and then you whip it up in no time. You have to actually live through your crazy idea and rethink it. Is this insane?
And they produce, as in, not just the writing of the book, but the whole down the line, everything from the idea of the book to it actually reaching a reader. That's all covered by produce in what you've just said, right?
Yeah, everything from conceptualization to looping the reader into it. That's, I mean, when I use the word produce, that's what I mean.
And the difficulty of all of that may address... I didn't say this when I was talking about how satisfying I find the experience of buying and reading and using books as they are, but there is one sticking point, is that they're, at least when sold new, about 3 times more expensive than I'm willing to pay most of the time. They're pricey. I don't know if that's a soluble problem, but that has to do, I would take it, with that difficulty of that whole production chain.
It does. I mean, when you take a retail, I mean, the retail price, the list price is dictated just like every other economic theory on the subject by what people will pay for it. If people weren't buying these books at the price that they're listed and sold for, the prices would go down.
Right. So it's in a way good that some people are paying, $29 for books. It shows they're willing to do that because many books cost that. Yeah,
I mean, the list price doesn't correlate to the manufacturing cost in any way. The one thing that, I just don't see changing is the cost going down unless some component, from publisher or author, let's go even back further, author to reader changes. Right now it goes from author to agent to publisher to distributor to retailer or wholesaler, then to reader. So unless one of those components is eliminated, then there's probably not going to be much fluctuation in how things are priced.
I take it the elimination of one of those seems unlikely too.
They all for right now serve a purpose. I mean, there are people that are trying to eliminate a lot of those components. You have a company like Amazon or even some of the other self-publishing or POD companies that are trying to just go straight to the authors and convince them that they don't need somebody to edit their books or design their books or tell them that they're not worth publishing. I'm not really seeing that as a viable way of sustaining an industry. I see that as companies finding a way to take advantage of a particular aspect of the marketplace. It's pretty brilliant in a lot of ways it's a 15 minutes type of approach, going to everybody alive and saying, you are special. You have a story to tell. We're going to make it really easy for you to do it. And sadly, that's not the case, and that's just not something that's going to continue to stabilize the book world.
Because that's the kind of book you want to read, right? As somebody got told by a website their story was worth telling, and so they hammered something out in Word.
Yeah, exactly. I know when I had people starting to come to us and say, I self-published this book, or I printed up some preliminary copies of this book, and I'd say, okay, all right, send over the design files, we'll take a look at it. And they'd send over a Word file Call me a snob, but that's when I realized that there was something seriously wrong between creation to publishing a book.
They weren't even going to go file, export as PDF. This was going to be this is a Word doc straight from the hard drive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are, POD houses, print on demand, will take a Word doc, which is just frightening to me. And then there are espresso machines, espresso book machines that companies and bookstores are buying up so they can take files. And I have an author that came to me a couple weeks ago, and he uploaded a Word doc, not a PDF, to Powell's for them to print 4 advanced readers' copies of his book to send out for critical review.
That's got to be quite a moment when the critic opens the galley and sees that they're clearly reading a Word document. It's a reflective moment.
Yeah, there are some that are really, really, really poorly done. I will give this author credit that he did the best job that I've ever seen anybody in designing a book on Word.
Oh, okay.
In Word.
That is its own sort of like challenge of severe limitations.
Yeah, I mean, how he put some of those things in really kind of blew me away. But still, that's just not how a book is designed, and there are a lot of reasons for that.
What fascinates you the most about the challenge of making a book marketable? And I guess your definition of marketable we might need to lay out here as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are lots of situations where we're dealing with publishers or we're arguing with authors on the books that we're publishing ourselves, and it comes to the point where marketing and publicity are usually the last things to be thought of when releasing something. There are lots of smart people and publishers out there that think about it from the beginning. I'm not saying I call across the industry, but the situations that aren't like that far outweigh the ones that are. And, we're often saying, we can't sell that. So do sales reps all the time. They say it to us, too. It's a great book cover, Tyson, but we can't sell that. So we're not alone in this. And there are all these rules where people will say, you gotta put a dog on the cover. I think I said earlier, or don't use these colors, or for these genres use these colors, and there are reasons why the people in the industry have those things, because they've been burned before, or they figured out certain things didn't work. Same reason why there's the Hitchcock lore, which I think is over now, about killing kids on screen. You can't kill a kid, or you can't kill a kid or a dog, I think, of the things, right? But I think people are doing that now and making a lot of money. But at the same time, you have to keep an open mind as to what is marketable. Because at any moment, somebody can come along and put something out there that you just cringe at, but it sells 5 million copies. Right. And then can you really say that you can't market that kind of thing? I mean, it really kind of comes down to people will be able to sell something to somebody at a certain price as long as they're willing to pay for it. That basic economic theory. It's the same thing with marketing something. It's successfully marketable if people are able to buy into the idea that it's,
Right. It sounds tautological almost, but it makes perfect sense. It's saleable if people are accepting of the idea that they should buy it. But finally, there are these black swan type events we allude to in publishing, where I remember a few years back, you know more about it than I do, I'm sure, but some girl wrote like vampire themed ebooks and ended up becoming a millionaire on the back of them, and the world suddenly realized she was unknown except to her fan base of, I guess, thousands of people. And there was briefly just a spate of stories about how this girl made herself a millionaire through writing vampire ebooks. And are those events, since you're in publishing, are those signs that the publishing world is more interesting and there are more possibilities and sort of more robust than it seems? Or is it more like, here's something else people are going to be trying in an even more mediocre way, and they're going to get the wrong idea about what publishing is?
Well, I think it's good. They're good and bad. I like the idea that people get hope and they feel like they can do anything. That is, I think, real magical. I would never want to criticize people to thinking creatively or wanting to produce something. It is amazing, though, how people can think that it's just that easy, because it's not. I like that it keeps publishers on their toes on, how things are created. That's a great thing. I'm also very critical and skeptical of those stories. It's like, one part of me conspiratorially wonders if they're real.
Oh, yes, like a Sparks question.
Yeah. And I say that because from a marketing point of view, if I worked for Amazon, that's exactly what I would go. I would go to the table with at the beginning of POD and giving authors more of a direct connection thing. I would say, okay, let's take this budget and let's create this whole idea that a lottery type scenario, that if you give it a chance, you take your creativity and you put it into the world, you too overnight could sell a million ebooks. And maybe those phenom stories are selling a whole lot, but I would not put it past people in this industry or any industry to puppeteer something like that. I would go in and propose that Amazon pick 7 golden childs and buy up those books internally and make it appear as if they took off. And they would become things beyond that, because that's just another marketing strategy to get people to pay attention to it. Look, this guy just sold 1 million ebooks, and then you're going to sell a lot more after that. So I don't want to get crazy, and I have no way of knowing that stuff. But all I know is that that's an idea that I would perhaps propose to them if I worked for them.
We know we're not casting aspersions on Amazon, but someone has thought about that there.
Yeah,
I said thought about it.
I think they're smart enough to have come up with something like that. So,
theories for you, the listener, to meditate upon, especially if you have kept a close eye on the progress of ebooks and other proposed replacements or new instantiations of the publishing model. I've been speaking here in downtown Los Angeles with Tyson Cornell. He is the founder of Rare Bird Lit and Rare Bird Books, the New York and Los Angeles-based publicity and events firm and publishing firm, respectively. He's also, of course, had a history at Book Soup on the Sunset Strip, and he's a punk rocker, and he has co-edited the anthology of essays on prog rock, which is called Yes is the Answer, out May 14th. Tyson, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to everybody who backed Season 3 on Kickstarter, including Paige Calvert, Jonathan Crow, Douglas Dollars, Paul Doyle, John French, Eric Graham, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Kimberly Hahn, Carl Haley, Stefan Halperin, Matt Howie, Andrew Hovenick, Mark Hines, Andy Cooney, Mark Larson, Matthew Lickey, Mr. Munvirzi, Rob Montz, Lindsay Muniak, Daniel Murphy, Aidan Millman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Blake Riley, Rob Schultz, Cam Smith, Small Demons, Todd Shimoda, Kevin Smokler, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, and Wayne Wright.